Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on global carbon. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. James Eid, Mr. Donalds, Mr. Dave, and Mr. David Smith. So let's start discussions. Mr. James Eid, how you want to analyze today's topic, especially global carbon?
Oh, Sharif, thank you for having us on the show. It's such an important topic. But I'd ask you to start with David. He does a much better job of setting the table than I do. We've done this for a long time, and I would defer to someone else, and my preference would be David. And then you can swing back to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'm sure he means
thank
David.
you. Thank you.
Oh, yes.
David Smith. Okay, Mr. David, Professor David Smith. Yes.
Well, Sharif, I agree with him. This is a really important topic, and it's a topic that's pretty complex because if we look at some of the key indicators as we look at global carbon and how they're put in place, part of it is you look at the greenhouse gas is a major part of it, and a lot of that's carbon dioxide, about 65%. But then you also see other ones in there as well, from methane, nitrous oxide, other type of gases, particularly fluorinated gases and things. And that goes into part of the global footprint of how you have to look at carbon. Other ways is you begin to look at them is by sector. And, agriculture, forest is about a quarter of it. Electricity and heat production is about a quarter of it. Transportation is about 15%, and industry is about 20%. And then multiple other things make up the other percentage of that. We tend to think, as we look at the whole carbon area, that transportation is one of the largest ones, but actually electricity and heating and agriculture and forestry use are all about equal as you look at how this is made up in the global society today and how those come into play. On the other hand, carbon is the backbone of life. We're made of carbon, we eat carbon, and much of our economies, our homes, our transportation, even what we're wearing is built on carbon. And we need it, but on the other hand, we need to work in harmony with it and understand that we're in there. Carbon is the fourth most abundant element in the universe. And so you see it's there as an important part. But the long-term question on this is, how do we manage it? How do we slow the carbon cycle that we've been going through that has been accelerated? And how do we begin to work through that? How do we work not just locally, but how do we work globally to go and address the issues that we have to face today to make sure our society is viable in the long term? So I think these are some of the key issues we have to address today.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Donald, how you want to analyze today's topic?
Who was that for?
Mr. Donald.
Donald, you're on
Mr.
mute.
Donald, can you unmute,
I know.
please?
I was unmuting myself there.
Okay.
Yeah, well, David laid it out pretty well, and he broke down the percentages. I want to point out one thing, that the percentage that he gave are the man-made greenhouse gases, but actually the biggest greenhouse gas is water vapor, and that they work together because the greenhouse gases that we make the earth hotter, and as the earth gets hotter, more water evaporates, so there's more water vapor in the air. So there's a positive feedback loop, because then since there's more water vapor in the air, it traps more heat, and then that makes even more water vapor, and it's kind of a very scary cycle that we're in right now. David also pointed out accurately that we're very dependent on the carbon-based energy sources. What happens in nature is that sunlight is converted to in plants. It basically takes carbon dioxide and water and a few other things, and it binds them together into longer, more complicated molecules, like sugars. And those molecules basically contain more energy as molecules than they do when they're broken down into their individual components. So it actually takes energy to hook them together, and it gets the energy from sunlight. So that's what photosynthesis is. And so then we take that energy is stored in various kinds of ways, and the way that's most problematic is that over millions and millions of years, plant material died and fell to the bottom of the ocean, and then sediment fell on top of that, and over time that became rocks that lived on top of this dead plant material, and the dead plant material just got crushed into oil, and the oil is what we use. And then when we take the oil and we burn it, it releases the energy. So what's happened is, in a way, petroleum is solar energy. It's just solar energy that's stored in a very different way. And the problem is it's putting back the carbon dioxide that was in the atmosphere over millions and millions and millions of years. And it becomes too much carbon dioxide for us, and it heats the world. And as it heats the world, it changes the weather patterns. And climate is really just the weather patterns. And so when the weather patterns change, climate has changed. And so if we have a lot more hurricanes and rain, and if there's more water vapor in the air, it's absolutely true that we're going to have more rain. All these various changes are starting to happen. One change that's happening is that the polar ice that floats in the ocean at the North Pole is every year when it gets winter, it all freezes. But now it's getting so, and then it freezes so solid that during the summer it can't completely melt. But now what's happening is as it gets warmer, it's not freezing as much. And so during the summer, it's getting to the point that it's actually melting. And there's getting to be a passage in the summer so ships can sail over the North Pole. And over time, this is just going to increase. We're looking at a very short window now until we're going to start seeing this. We are seeing sea level. The North Pole doesn't contribute to sea level rise, but there's an incredible amount of ice stored in Greenland and Antarctica, which are also warming up. And as that ice melts, it causes various problems like fresh water on the surface of the ocean, change the currents, and sea level rise, which is accelerating. And most people live by the ocean, so as the sea level rises, people are going to have to move, which is also a big problem. So I'm just laying out the basic problem. Now, how are we going to change that? Well, really the only way that we can change it that we know of right now is to use less fossil fuels. And there's an attempt to sequester carbon that's going on in Greenland right now. The problem is as I said, those long molecules, you have to use energy to hook them back together. So to take carbon dioxide and do something with it so that and methane, to do something with them so that they're locked into something so they're not in the atmosphere requires energy. And the main way we have of making energy right now is burning fossil fuels. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. In Iceland, they have geothermal energy because they have so many volcanoes, but really in Iceland, that's just a way of exporting their geothermal energy by selling energy credits, because the amount of energy that amount of carbon dioxide that they're sequestering is about as much as in a year is about as much as 3 seconds of how much humans produce. So it's inconsequential. So the COP conference just happened in Scotland, and the various countries, basically, it was a big nothing burger, as Greta Thunberg said, blah, blah, blah. And nothing really happened out of that, unfortunately. So there's no story, there's no way that we've talked about, that we've come up with to actually really start addressing this problem at this point. People come up with ideas like, well, everybody should cut back, and everybody should do this, and everybody should do that. But, you know, if anybody's ever tried to go on a diet, or, you know, swore that New Year's resolution that they're going to exercise every day, or smoked and try and quit smoking, or know anybody that's tried, you know, just the smallest change like that is very, very, very difficult to do. And we're asking 7.5 billion people to change their lifestyle, or accept a lifestyle that's not as materially well-being, not having as much material well-being as is necessary to have enough food and light at night. I mean, it's hard to become educated if you can't study at night at home because you don't have light. And we're in an incredible dilemma right now, and it's a very scary and serious thing. So that's what I'm going to say.
Thank you, Professor Dave. How you want to analyze these global carbon issues?
Well, for me, I'm finished with analyzing the issue. What I'm analyzing now is the solutions, and I've always been focused on solutions, because our problem is that we keep talking about the problem over and over and over again, and it's circular, as Donald says. And so how do we as individuals solve this problem? And that's what COP did not address. What they talked about was what governments could do and what industry could do. But at home, you've got people going, what can I do? And if you ask an average person here in the United States, are you working on the problem or on the solution? Oh, I'm working on the solution. I recycle. And that's the end of the story. So with that in mind, about 4 years ago, I started working on a project and a book called The Green Actioneer's Family Action Guide. Now, half of the carbon that's released into the atmosphere in this country, in the United States, comes from things that individual families do. It's what we as individuals do, and that's what we don't accept. It's our energy use in transportation. It's our heating and air conditioning. It's our lighting. It's our appliances in our homes. It's the food that we eat, and it's the things that we buy, many of which are shipped in from far away. And we haven't individually taken responsibility for those things. And that's what we've got to do now. Now we've got things coming down from the top, trickle down. What we don't have is what Donald said we need, and that is bubble up. We need every family in the developed world to take responsibility for their own carbon use, carbon footprint, the amount of carbon they put into the atmosphere. And it starts with the developed world, because the developed world is the miscreant. We're the ones who've done it. And a question in the chat is, what are the countries that are doing the worst? Well, it's the US and China. I was in China in 1980. It was an undeveloped country. The average carbon footprint was probably about the same as it is now for Africa. And then we took all of our industry in the West, both in the US and in Europe, and we shipped that industry to China. And we said, here, you make our stuff for us. We're not going to make it anymore. The reason we're not going to make it is because it pollutes our countries. We don't want to pollute our countries. You make it and you sell it to us and transfer the pollution to them. So then China became the most polluting country. Well, that was not a good thing to do. It took a lot of jobs out of the wealthy countries and transferred them to the poor countries. So then China became a wealthy country, and China started creating carbon in the atmosphere themselves, not only with the things that they're making, but their own consumerism. I worked in South Korea in 1966 through 1976. The average per capita income when I got there was $800 a year. The average per capita income now in South Korea is $35,000 a year. The carbon footprint of a Korean in 1966, when I got there, was tiny, minuscule, did not contribute much to the problem. The carbon footprint of the average Korean now is as big as the United States. So people are pointing fingers in every direction. Here's the problem, here's the problem, here's the problem. And they aren't pointing their fingers in towards themselves. We are the problem. And until we collectively start a movement at the village level, which means the household level, house by house, kid by kid, family by family, we're not going to make the changes that are necessary in order to solve the problem. And that's the missing element. The missing element is we're building trickle down, but we're not building bubble up. So that's where the Green Actioneers Family Action Guide comes in. This is not the solution. This is a piece of the solution. This is a way to get families to go through the book, find things that they can do. You might call it drawdown for families. It's got a kids section. It's the things that kids can do. It's a coloring book. It's got a word game. The word game is always tied to the text. The text now is in English and Spanish. Eventually, the text will be in English and anything, many languages. It's got a quote from somebody famous on every page, a quote about the environment. The missing element is links. We're going to put QR codes in here that will link the book to all the companies that are listed in the book. So if you want to get double-paned windows or an electric car, then you can click on the QR code and you'll go there. So that's the book for North America. Now somebody can create this book. You can use this as the template. I'd love to have you get a copy and get in touch with me, Dave Finnegan at greenactioneers.com, and get a copy. And in your country, publish something like this. Now, our launch is going to be on Earth Day. That's 4/22/22. And we hope to start in 100 schools simultaneously here in the United States, so that 100 different families will go into their school and say, we're going to convene family night. These are the green-hearted families. And they're going to convene family night. And then all the green-hearted families in the school will come in and join and start the program for that school. But that's the logical place for this to start. We've started a lot of programs through schools. We've started seatbelts. We started anti-drug, anti-drinking. All these things started in schools. So it's time for us to go to the schools. Now, the schools aren't going to do this themselves because this is not part of the curriculum. This has to come in from outside the curriculum. So from outside the curriculum, with an outside program presented by somebody in the school who has the right sensibility, they'll convene family night. Now, in this country, and maybe in other countries as well, there's a company called Scholastic Books. And Scholastic Books takes books into schools. You can't find a Scholastic book in the bookstore. Well, you can now, but you couldn't before the pandemic because all their books were distributed through schools. Well, that's what we're going to do. And the Green Actioneers Family Action Guide is going to be available at family night in schools all over the US and Canada. And I challenge people all over the world to do the same thing in their country as well. It's only when we harness the power of those small voices, those kids who are going, we want change. It's only once we harness that power and we put it together with the power of their parents who want their kids to have a clean, green future. That's when we will get change. And we haven't tried that yet. It's time to try it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jebsi.
Yes, thank you, Sharif. Again, wonderful topic, wonderful panel. I've really written down a lot already. David Smith, I apologize for passing the buck to you, but you do such a good job at table setting that I, and I also, to be honest, when I state stats, you usually correct me. So I wanted you to go first. But yeah, the primary offenders are the developed countries, but as Dave Finnegan was just telling us, you know, the U.S. was the primary one, and China's just caught up, and in some ways surpassing the U.S. And India is not far behind. So you know, and when the developed countries say to the developing countries, "Don't pollute," it's pretty hard sell because they say, "Well, you did it, and look where you are. Why should we not do what you did?" And so it's a very hard sell to say, don't do what we did because of these disastrous consequences when you're going to make the disaster even more severe. Yet we already did it and we profited from it. So ha ha ha. You know, it just doesn't work. So, but what we need to emphasize is collaboration and cooperation rather than competition. All three are important. You know, we're out of balance now where we're just focusing on competition and China versus the US, and somebody's going to win, someone's going to lose, you know, and what we really need to get into is the mindset of collaboration and cooperation. What happened in Glasgow was at least a tiny step towards that. So although it didn't come up with any solutions, it didn't come up with any policy changes that are really going to make a difference, you know, it's a step towards collaboration, cooperation that we require to face this challenge because it affects us all. And as Dave Finnegan said, you know, and as our other panelists know, I always indicate, start with yourself. What can you do? You know, ask not what the earth can do for you, but what you can do for the earth. And how do you make small changes in your life that will help to solve this global problem? And you make small changes and you think, well, what difference does it make? Well, if 1 million people make small changes, then matters. And if 1 million people make small changes, then it's a significant factor. So this is what we need to do. Start with yourself. And then, you know, don't preach to others, but, you know, influence the others in your community and surrounding you. And then in their sphere of influence, they can influence more people. And that's how this grows. That's how it bubbles up from the top. And, you know, are we doing that today? Not enough. So we need to do more work, harder, but start with yourself. Take personal responsibility for this because what you do matters. And if you want to say, well, it doesn't matter, then you're just another brick in the wall. We don't need walls, we need bridges. So this is what I wanted to say. I was really happy that Donald brought up about the ice melting and the effect that it has on the water vapor and how that feeds into the system, because it's all a system. The systems is, I steal from David Smith a lot. But, you know, these things are accelerating, you know, and it's almost funny that if Henry Hudson set sail today, he would find the Northwest Passage. But, you know, it's not funny. It's sad because these things are happening and we do not have the political will, the shared will across the globe to make the changes necessary to stop them. And when we do get that will, it will be too late unless we raise the awareness now. We needed to start working on these problems yesterday, and tomorrow will be too late. So do it now. This is when we have a chance. We still have a fighting chance, and that's all you can ask for, is a fighting chance. So take it. And one of the things that I would like to emphasize is that the marine biospheres are very good at taking carbon out of the air and repurposing it. They're even better than forests. But what we do is we build ports, we destroy them. We build homes, we destroy them. So, this is where we have to raise our awareness and stop doing the things that just are cutting our nose off despite our faces and just counterproductive. These are the environments that help the systems survive. These are the things that we are destroying. And these are the things we must stop, allow them to rebuild, regenerate. These are the things that we must do. And so, what does this take? This really takes leadership. And when I say leadership, sometimes I'm misinterpreted. I don't mean the powers that be. I mean leadership at the local levels, leadership at the grassroots levels, leadership until it bubbles up so that the leaders that we elect to lead our country are saying the same things we're saying today. And when we get them on board, policy will change, and then policy changes will have an impact. And if one country does it, it does not work. America first is America alone. We must make policy changes around the world because this is a global problem. We're all in this together. And thanks again, Sharif, for this excellent discussion. I'm happy to be part of it.
Thank you, Mr. James. A few questions from, I'm sure Professor David Smith already shared one of the informations on Onika Shams. I want to take Onika's question as well. Countries for carbon emissions in the upcoming days. So,
well, Sharif, let me jump into that with a couple of the points that I think are important after Dave brought them up, if you don't mind. Is that okay? Let's start back pretty much at the beginning, though. If I look at the whole carbon market size, the market size today is really fairly minuscule on a grand scale. It's about $275 billion of a global market. But that is only part of the story. You've got to begin to look at the other elements. But Dave brought up something very important. I mean, if I look at the top countries, it's China, United States, India, Russia, Japan, Germany, Canada, and going further down. But if I go and look at some of the other numbers, and it's the other numbers that tell some of the stories. For example, China is almost 30% of the global carbon emissions as you look at it. United States is about 14%, which is the second largest. But Dave brought up the thing per capita, and I find the per capita numbers particularly interesting because the country that has the highest carbon emissions per capita, if you begin to look at the list, is Canada. Canada is 18.58 per capita. China 7.38. United States is 15.5, but Russia is 11.4. South Korea is 11.8. Saudi Arabia is 15.9. But of the top 20, the country with the highest emissions per capita is Australia. And, it's kind of interesting as you begin to drill down into the numbers because you have to look at the various types of numbers. And if I'm going to go back and do the bubble up approach, you have to begin to look at the cause effect at the different places. Why is China percentage so low? It's because their population is huge. And that goes into the numbers. But the fact that China has 29% of the total emissions, it's a top-down problem that needs to be addressed there as well. So you have to go both ways. Now, for such a critical problem, though, the market size of carbon and carbon solutions is tiny. If this is the critical issue that we're having to face right now in our generation, then the spending should be much higher on this. The market size should be tremendously higher because we have to do it on a global basis and we have to do it on a coordinated basis across. And those are the elements that are the secret in the bag, because we're talking a lot about this, we're giving it a lot of attention, but we're not spending a lot of money to develop the solutions to solve it. So, Sharif, I think that is kind of it's there, but you have to look deeper in the numbers to understand them too.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Professor Dave, there are some other questions from audience. I think as you know better solutions, so maybe you can offer the solution beside your book. If you share other things, let's say, how are some reduce carbon emission?
Yeah, I think that what you need to do personally is look at your own life. And if you're in the developed world, then that means look at what you can reduce in terms of carbon. For instance, I don't fly anymore. I used to fly. My car is an electric car. It's an old electric car, not a Tesla. I have solar panels on my roof. We put double pane doors on. We put special doors on the house. We're going to do double pane windows next. So I'm reducing my own carbon footprint. Trying to serve as a model to my neighbors, we planted vegetables in our front yard, which is allowed under Florida law. Unfortunately, our homeowners association has now attacked us and is fining us for having improper vegetation in our yard. So I have to work on them and get them to change their point of view that that's not appropriate for them to ban people from growing their own vegetables. And also the other side of our yard is butterfly friendly. Well, they made us take everything out because it's not on the list. So the homeowners association has a list of permitted plants, and milkweed is not on the list. So they're finding us $100 a day until we take out all of our milkweed and vegetables out of our front yard. But the Florida state law says that we're allowed to do that. So you have to be ready to have that battle at the local level. You have to be ready to do it yourself and talk to your neighbors. And if you have a controlling authority like a homeowners association, you have to be ready to do a little bit of arm wrestling with them to get them to understand that what you're doing may not fit their concept of appropriate, but it's appropriate for the planet. So that's where we are now, is in two battles. One battle is internal, and that is to get ourselves to stop using so much energy. The lights that I use right here, when I'm in discussions like this and I'm talking to people who are in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, quite often I can't see them because they don't use so much light, because they don't have that much energy to waste. But here I sit bathed in light. Well, that's because we're having a discussion online. Normally, I wouldn't have this much light. If I see a light on, I switch it off if it's not being used. That's the kind of consciousness that has to change. And that's why the Green Actioneers Family Action Guide has over 100 actions that every family can take. We call it Drawdown for Families, so that each family needs to look at itself just as we're looking at the planet and say about itself, this is how I want to be. My wife is from a village in the Philippines. She grew up without any running water, paved road, no vehicular transportation, just your feet, and no running water, no electricity. And she's fine. And she wants us to learn how to live like that again. Not that we have to get rid of the things that are helping us to live a modern life, but that we have to learn how to use them in moderation. And so that's what everybody has to do. Everybody has to learn moderation and reduce their own carbon expenditure, and then work with their neighbors. Now, people say it's too late for that. Well, why are you planting a tree today? You should have planted that tree 20 years ago. And the same thing is true with the Green Actioneers Family Action Guide. The book is too late. Well, it may be too late, but all we can work with is now forward. We can't go back. So that's why I'm intent on getting this book into 100 elementary schools on Earth Day in the United States, so that our launch will be big. It'll be big enough to draw media attention, because there are 100 elementary schools all putting this book into the hands of families in one day. And then the media will pay attention to it. And the media will say, why are you doing this? And how are you doing this? And who is doing this? And when they say that, then we get the media attention, and the media attention allows us to get more people on board. And it's only when we get many, many, many people on board that we'll begin to see this glacier melt. We'll begin to see the change take place. And that's what we need to do. We need to change the world. This has to become a movement, and movements do not start at the top. Think about anything that's come to society. When I was a kid, my parents were saying, don't listen to that music. That's evil music. That's rock and roll. The government wasn't telling us to listen to rock and roll. Quite the opposite. But we listened to it, and it changed the musical world. And the same thing happens with everything. Yes, they want it to change at the top. Here's how politicians work. They figure out where people are going, and then they jump in front of them and say, I'm their leader. Well, it's time for us to have a movement toward green. And then the appropriate politicians will come and jump in front of us and say, I'm their leader. And until we do that, we're just going to be going around in circles discussing the problem and not talking about the solutions. So from my point of view, the solution is personal. Do it now. Work with your neighbors. Create a community of green-hearted people. Get the Green Actioneers Family Action Guide. Take the steps that are in there. Go beyond that. Join the Navigator Scouts. Join the Green Team Superheroes. Those are two organizations that want to work with schools and get things going. Make a movement. Until you make a movement out of this, we're not going to get change. I was talking to somebody the other day. I said, what do you think about COP26? They said, what's COP26? I said, oh, it's the Congress of Parties working on climate change. Oh, really? People are working on that? Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. I thought it was just something scientists talked about. I didn't realize people actually were working on it. Hadn't you heard of COP26? No, I don't watch TV. Well, that person needs to know this. And the way they're going to learn it is their kid is going to come home from school and they're going to say, Mom, tonight is family night. We're going to have Green Action Family Night at school, and we're going to start talking about going green. Mom says, what's going green? Well, Mom, it's saving energy and saving the planet for me. Oh, okay, I'll do that for you, dear. And that's the two energies we're going to harness, the nagging power of children and the love of parents for their kids. And that's what's going to change things. Until we get those two powers harnessed and linked together, yes, it's true, things are going to happen at the top. We're going to have industry and government making noise and making moves. But a lot of that stuff that's supposed to be happening at the top is a facade. You've got the oil companies and other energy companies financing a lot of this. I see ads on TV all the time that are cringeworthy ads about going green that come from the energy companies, and they're not really about going green. They're about how they can maintain their hegemony on the sale of energy, and it's a smokescreen, and we've got to get people smart enough they can get past that smokescreen, and they can really make changes. So this is a fight for the future of the planet. Every species that has outgrown its niche has eventually perished. And we have outgrown our niche. And it's time for us to pull back and get back inside our niche to understand what it is that we can do without destroying ourselves. And we aren't ready to do that yet. And the only way we're going to get ready to do that is when everybody, starting with the kids, moves forward on this. Now, it's true, there's two different definitions of kids. One definition of kids is Greta Thunberg and her teenage friends. Those kids are already getting on board. I'm talking about the little guys. I'm talking about kindergarten through 7th or 8th grade, the ones who aren't yet on board. That's our audience and their parents. Because by the time you're in high school, by the time you're 17 years old, you don't have a lot of conversations with your parents unless you're in trouble or in sports. Otherwise, they're over there and you're over here. So we've got to create communities moving toward green in the developed world. Now, I don't know about the third world. The third world people are eager to be like us. And what we have to be able to say is, we've got a new model for you. Don't follow the old model. The old model is not right. Here's a new model. We've created a new model. Follow the new model. Thank you.
Donald, I think you're up next. Sharif might be frozen.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate David's enthusiasm and his work that he's doing to try and be able to raise awareness for this. And it certainly is true that the younger people are a better target, because as people get more established in life, they start developing networks of relationships and habits and things like that get increasingly more difficult to change. Right now, residential energy use is about 20% of energy use, and transportation is 30%. Air travel is a pretty small chunk of that. The main thing that people use energy for is driving around in cars. And electric cars help, but right now most electricity in California is made with natural gas, which is which then burns and becomes, well, it itself is methane. So if it escapes while in the process of getting it to you, then it adds more methane to the atmosphere. And after you burn it, it does release CO2. So it's also a petroleum-based gas, and it contributes to greenhouse gases. How we're going to switch that is problematic. I myself am, this is something that would get me shot or at least pummeled to death with an organic carrot if I said it out loud in Santa Cruz, is that I'm a proponent of nuclear power. I think that it's a viable option. However, it takes decades to make a nuclear plant, and we don't really have, we should have started, as with everything else, we should have started that a long time ago. I read some optimistic work that's being done on fusion, and they've actually managed to sustain fusion reactions, which would be wonderful. But as the article said, this was in Nature. It's only 10 years in the future, always has been and always will be. So we'll see what happens with that. I also want to mention that I don't have a television either. I've never had a television my entire adult life, and I try and watch it, and I can't handle commercials. I just can't handle them. I just literally cannot stand them. So I can't watch. I can't really make myself watch television, and I get all the information I need by reading some various very what we call high quality information sources, high quality journals, and two I recommend to everyone are Nature and Science. And these are paywall journals. However, they do have a news, daily or very rapid periodic news. So if you go to the website nature.com and science.com, it may be science.org, but you can sign up for their mailing list, and they give you a very steady stream of the latest information about what's going on. Was a good article on COP basically saying that it was a big nothing burger, sadly. It's nice to have people talking about it. I want to address what David was saying a little bit. It goes back to what I was saying, is how difficult it is to change things. I mean, there's levels. After World War II, the United States invested a lot of money and a lot of energy into, in both senses, emotional energy and energy into making it so that every American could have their own home. And they subsidized this, and it became a thing. And if you talk to many Americans, their whole idea that they're going to have a home, it's so important to them that it's part of their identity to own a home. And the problem is that these are very, very far apart. They get very far apart from each other, because if each one has an acre, and a city has millions of people in it, then in order to do that, it takes millions of acres just to build everybody their own houses so their kids can play in the backyard. And we've already done that. It's that way. And the psychology of it is already there. And people's beliefs. And I was just taking a course, as I was telling some of the other panelists, on positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. And one of the things that just really impressed me is that Martin Seligman, who basically invented positive psychology, is completely up on the latest neuroscience. And what we've learned in neuroscience now is that the past and the present aren't that interesting for how human beings behave. It doesn't have a lot to do with our psychology. And the whole history of neuroscience, of psychology, we've been looking into people's past to figure out what trauma they had and blah, 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 and trying to fix that. And that actually doesn't work very well, and hasn't ever worked very well. And when you're probably, most of you that are listening to this show are thinking, well, gosh, what does this mean for me? I mean, if there's going to be global warming and blah, 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 what's going to happen? And I'm going to tell you that the United States, the birth rate is the lowest it's ever been. And people aren't having kids. And when you ask them, why aren't you having kids? They say, because they won't have a future. It would be a wrong thing to do. And many of them, that's a huge reason. And that's basically how our beliefs about the future change our behavior in the present. And what we act on are stories, on narratives of our beliefs about what happened. So the story that we need to have a home for ourselves, and the stories about what we need to have, are completely part of us, part of our society, and part of who we are, how we create our identity. And it's possible to change those stories. But sadly, the people who've gotten absolutely the best at changing those stories are people like the Heritage Foundation and the Heartland Foundation and these other right-wing think tanks have gotten which are funded by the oil industry, are just brilliant at it. There's science of narrative analysis. They can look at the stories, they can look at people's beliefs, they can craft the beliefs, and then using media, they can basically create stories for people. So as I was saying before, just think of how hard it is to change anything in your life. Get more exercise, lose weight, stop smoking, do anything. Read more books, anything that you say to yourself that you want to do to make yourself a better person. As soon as you go into default mode, where you're just acting out of habit, you're not going to do those things. And so being able to change them is difficult. So the way that you can do that and you can change that things is to kind of reconceptualize who you are. And the way that you can do that is to change the stories about who you are. And I just want to mention that there are places in this world where many of the children don't have enough to eat. They grow up basically stunted because they grew up without enough food. And so it's not really fair to say to them that they can't use enough energy in order to be able to thrive and become healthy and have good lives. So we're really in a bind because it's very, very difficult to be able to get people to change their stories and change the narratives. And it's also very, very difficult to, it's immoral to say that we don't want people to be able to have the kinds of lives where their children thrive and they thrive and have good lives. So it's an interesting dilemma, and I think that the key to it is to start getting into understanding how these stories and these narratives create who we are, and work together to create narratives that counter the narratives that are fed to us by the oil industry. I mean, many of these people have a belief that the world is going to come to an end and that that's okay. And so they don't really care if the world comes to an end. It's not a problem for them. So that for those of us that want to sustain human life on Earth and have human life thrive, we need to get together and imagine what that would be like, what that could be like. And it's got to be fair. We've got to be able to have the people who don't have enough to thrive be able to thrive. And we've got to be able to not be unrealistic about what people are going to give up. And so that's what I want to say right now.
Thank you. Mr. James Ed.
Thank you, Sharif. That's just fascinating listening to all of the different ideas that have been expressed today. I do think that we need to think back and excuse me, my computer's acting up. We need to think back. Most of our history, the grandparents' experience was much like the grandchild's. And the pace of change is accelerated to such a point today that that's no longer the case. So we can't look to people as the elder statesmen who have the answers for how we're going to live. We're creating them as we go. So this is a new problem, and Donald was just magnificent in expressing, how are we going to survive and thrive? Because this is an extinction level thing that we're talking about. This is not something that we can just postpone to tackle with later, because later some other species will be dealing with the environmental changes. So this is not something that we're being overly dramatic about. This is happening before our eyes. Once in a 500-year storms are happening regularly now. So this is something that, the climate change is affecting the weather systems, and the weather systems affecting the climate. And all of these things are being demonstrated right in front of our eyes. And we used to pour industrial waste into rivers because we thought the rivers were inexhaustible. Well, when the rivers finally caught fire, we said, ooh, they're not inexhaustible. So now we're doing it to the oceans. And so now we have islands of plastic where we never had islands of plastic throughout human history. This is a new phenomenon. Now we have floods in places that were normally dry. And we have what we call heat domes. I didn't even use that term 2 years ago. Heat domes in places that were historically wet. So things are brand new, and we can't look to the past to help us. And and the past and the present may not be as interesting as the future. And typically it is historically trained. You would use the past to inform the future. It's not so easy now. These are novel problems. Much like the pandemic is a novel virus, and we floundered for a while before we figured out how best to deal with it. And we still don't have 100% consensus on what we should do, and we still have deniers. And the obstacles that Dave Finnegan was talking about, these obstacles are powerful. You have to go up against the fossil fuel industry. And so even when you bubble up, even when you start to make a big change and it's starting to get noticed, you are going to run into opposition. You're going to run into powerful opposition. And this is where leadership can matter, because in India, you had a man named Gandhi, and he made a difference. In South Africa, you had a man named Mandela, and he made a difference. People rallied behind them, and they spoke the truth. So all these commercial ads that are lying to you, they're cringeworthy, absolutely. These will not win the day if we can rally behind a leader that is telling the truth, not a leader who is telling you what you want to hear so that you can pretend that everything's okay. Everything is not okay. But it is not too late. We have a fighting chance, and we must fight. On an individual basis, we must change ourselves. Start with yourself. What can you do? So I applaud Dave Finnegan and his Green Options Family Guide. This is the type of thing that means that people will know what they could do, should do, would do. And then you have to have the will to do it. Because I have solar panels, I drive an electric car, but maybe you don't have the resources to do that for yourself. But what can you do? Find out what you can do and do that. And everybody will benefit. And again, if one person does a small thing, it doesn't matter. But if millions do it, it starts to matter. So just change yourself first. Focus on yourself first, and then influence those around you. But homeowners associations are only one step in the opposition that you will face. There will be faced with an opposition that is united because they share the same common wisdom, the conventional wisdom. And the conventional wisdom of the past and present is not going to work in the future. So we must change people's thinking, and change not just how they think, but also their hearts. When did it become uncommon to talk about the common good? And the common good now is not just with the community you live in, but it's the global community that we all live in. And that's why we must collaborate and cooperate rather than just compete. And what is the energy future? What's the mineral that it's not going to be carbon so much as what's precious in the future is going to be cobalt. And where is cobalt? Where do you find cobalt? You find it in Africa. And who's going there and controlling the cobalt mining and distribution? China. Why? Because the United States can't figure this stuff out, can't get into any agreement, can't say, well, this is what we need to do and this is how we're going to do it. But China is a different political structure, and they say, well, we need this, go get it. And so this is, and will that help China? Yes. Will that hurt the United States? Maybe. What if we cooperated and we distribute things more equitably where they're needed and use the appropriate technologies where they're needed? Don't build a windmill where there's no wind. So these are the types of things that we have to be putting our heads together with and figuring out what the appropriate answer is for the appropriate communities, and then do that. Again, we have a fighting chance if we get there. But the mindset change, as Donald pointed out, people are hard to change. If they have a way of thinking, it's very difficult to change it. But that's why you need one voice. And as he pointed out, I just started to subscribe to science after Donald mentioned it. Maybe I'll start to subscribe to nature as well. Get the informed information sources, the information sources that are trustworthy, because there are so many out there that are trying to persuade, not inform, but to persuade you to their way of thinking. So these are the challenges, the types of challenges that we face. But I think scientists can no longer afford to be sitting on the sidelines. Scientists cannot be the elder statesmen. Scientists must be the warriors going out there and telling us the facts. And, we have in the United States, we have Dr. Fauci, who didn't want to be on television every day when he started out in his medical practices. But, he's had to take a leadership role. Why? Because the other people were out there telling lies, falsehoods, misinformation. Somebody had to go out there. And of course, he became a target. All these forces attacked him. And he's had to defend them. So it's scary to be a leader, to go out there and put yourself on the line, because you will be attacked. Guaranteed. Because there are powerful forces in opposition that want things to stay the same, because they make money at it. It's in their selfish self-interest. And we need to focus on our enlightened self-interest when we start to think about the common good as well as our individual good. Thanks again, Sharif, for a wonderful show. Great panelists.
Thank you.
I
This
think
is
that's something
really
that's important that we have not addressed, and that is how do we segment the people who we're going to be talking to, so that we don't waste our time trying to convert the laggards, when what we really should be doing is finding the innovators and the early adopters and the early majority, the people who are going to be on our side, and getting them together, rather than going over and trying to fight against the people who are always going to be against us. So our approach is, within the school, we find the 2 or 3 families that already have green hearts, and we ask them to organize family night and to invite in the early adopters. And the early adopters are people who are sort of like them. Maybe they already bought a Prius, or they put solar panels on their roof. So invite them in, make them part of your circle, and hold family night and get the book into everybody's hands. And then you guys go out and find the early majority. And the early majority are those other families who have not yet gotten enlightened about this subject, but have all the right information. It's just not lined up appropriately in their brains so that they can move in the right direction. Get them on board. Then you go for the late majority. The late majority are the people who haven't yet thought through this, but could be on your side. But whatever you do, don't take the book and put it in the face of a laggard and say, you should do this, because the laggards are going to be against you. Their whole approach is, no, I'm against it. And what you have to do is find people who say, well, maybe I'm open-minded. And so there's a really good system that was created. I know it was created in 1961 because I read the book in 1962 when I was a senior in college. And it's by Everett Rogers, and it's called Diffusion of Innovations. And he talks about how innovations are spread throughout a society. And when I went to South Korea in 1966, I took that book with me. And when I helped the country of South Korea design their family planning program, that was, to me, my Bible, because we didn't want to go out and broadcast to everybody, you should have small family size. What we wanted to do was find the people who were already attuned to that. And so we did. My Korean colleagues and I commissioned 2,500 women to work at the village level, going door to door as field workers. And their job was to create a club, a ladies club, a women's club at the village level to talk to women about small family size. Who are they talking to? They're talking to young women who have 0 or 1 or maybe 2 kids. And what are they saying? What they're saying flies completely in the face of the Korean culture. They're saying girls are as good as boys, 2 are enough, space them well, and give them a good education. Well, that theme permeated the Korean culture, starting at the household level, starting with young families. Now, if you go to Korea and you say to a young couple, how many kids do you want? They'll say 1 or 2. They'll say in 1966, they said 6 because they needed a son for the military, they needed a son for the farm, to run the farm, and needed a son for the priesthood. Well, now they don't care if it's a girl or a boy. In fact, they'd probably rather have a girl, and they'll tell you that because girls tend to stay loyal to the parents. Well, the son goes away. And so that changed. And when I got to Korea, the world's population was about to be 3 billion people. And I said, this is crazy. The world cannot support 4, 5, or 6 billion people. We've got to stop population growth. Well, the problem is you solve one problem, you create another. So now I just looked at the list of the emissions by countries and found, of course, that South Korea is one of the most emitting countries. Well, we didn't talk about that, but we did talk about family size. And we talked about girls are as good as boys and space them well. And that little message changed a culture because it started with the people who were the innovators and the early adopters. It didn't start with somebody at the top, at the government level, saying, this is what you should do. Of course, China looked across at what we were doing in Korea and Taiwan and came up with their own plan. And their plan was the one-child family. And it worked, but to what end? So we did voluntarily what China did by edict. So that's just a little history from what I did back in the 60s that I think augurs well for what we can do now, but we've got to go at it step by step. We've got to go find those innovators and early adopters and get them on board instead of just talking to the population at large. Thanks.
Thank you. This is really great discussion, especially we are discussing about global carbons and global warming is very important issue, especially after the COP26, we are observing many countries are trying to taking different initiative, but we need more practical initiative. Hopefully today's discussion will help us to take some sort of practical strategy which will be helpful for our society, especially for developing world. Thank you all of our speakers, those who joined today. Especially I want to give thanks to our audience. Please share our content with your government, corporation, and academy. Thank you for all of your support. And I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. I want to start from Professor David Smith. What's your concluding remarks?
Sharif, very good session today. Thank you again for including me as part of your wonderful sessions. This is a very important climate. It's not just a local issue. It's not just a regional issue. It's a global issue. And we need to address it from a global standpoint. But you have to start with all parts of the ecosystem. The impact of this is going to be great on all the sectors, and the private sector, the public sector, the commercial sector, the academic sector. But all of them have to work together for this to be successful. And we need to look at the places there. There's a fair amount of science that needs to be worked, so great opportunities for universities, colleges, a lot of entrepreneurship opportunities. But like I said earlier, we need to look at ways to increase the funding. to bring innovative new approaches into play on solving some of these problems from both a science and services standpoint. Finally, I agree with Dave, Donald, and James on almost everything they said. We've got to do it. We've got to have top down. We have to have bubbles up. We have to have innovation, and we have to have governments that work together to make it happen. And we've got to have action from all those different geometries to make this happen. So, Sharif, thank you so much again for letting me be part of this.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. James, what's your concluding remarks?
Sharif, I don't like to speak when there's a graphic on. If you can take that down.
Mr. James, actually, this is very important for our session because we utilize it for academic purpose, for high level policy development.
Well, if you're going to put a graphic up, speak to it, and then I'll speak afterwards.
Please, give me a chance. If we do not utilize proper evidence, it's mean it's not valuable, especially for academy and policy development. Example, I already invite you 1 December to 3 December. I invite you all. Do not, even I'm sure all of the speakers actually preparing presentation. When we go for this kind of high quality production, this kind of graph, this kind of information, even presentation, we want to welcome. Because it's not only open dialogue, I come and openly discuss because government will not allow. Example, in our upcoming session, Japan government, German government, Rwanda government, United Nations, some point in USA, as well as Nigeria governments, their ambassador they are sending. So I request you as well as all of our speakers, we need really good evidence. And World Talent Economy Forum, purely think tank, we need it. We really need it. Thank you.
Sharif, I have total respect for you and what you're doing. This is a great thing that you're doing. My only request is that if you're going to put a graphic up, speak to the graphic and allow me to speak without the graphic shown. So this is an example of cooperation. And my concluding remarks are, that we are faced with diverting a catastrophe. This is the problem, and if you state the problem accurately, it's half solved. All the rest that's required is work. And the problem that we have right now is that we're destroying the very planet that we use to survive. And we don't want to just survive. What's the point? We want to survive and thrive. Yet we can't continue to poison, to keep putting toxins into the environment. And now what we faced opposition, yes, we're going to face opposition, and we have the deniers. And as Dave Finnegan was telling us, don't waste time talking to the deniers. They're already convinced. No matter how much data you show them, they'll question the data. No matter how many sources you cite, they'll question the source. You can't convince them. Their minds are made up. Don't try. Don't waste your time. And then you have some opposition that is based, well, climate change happens. It's just natural. It happens. And then it gets cold, and then it gets warm, and then it gets cold, and then it gets warm. Yes, but this is begging the question. The question is, does this man have any impact on this climate change that we're facing today? And the answer is yes. It has since the dawn of the industrial age. Now, the problem is that the change is accelerating. The influence of man on climate has accelerated. It's like a hockey stick. It's going like this. All of a sudden, it goes like this. And this is what we're facing today. The impact of man on climate is undeniable since we entered the nuclear age. We could poison the planet like that if countries go to war and use nuclear weapons. But what we're doing it is through industry and through transportation and all of the things that we're talking about, that the man-made and climate change is what we're talking about. So what can we do? We can talk about what can man do to stop poisoning the environment and to clean it up, because technologies exist now to capture carbon and to reuse and and what we can do is stop deforesting the planet, and stop destroying the marine biology systems that help restore the planet, because the Mother Earth will survive. It will survive the infestation of mankind and the pollutions that we were causing, the toxins that we were putting into it. She will survive. Will we? That is the question. Because once we go away, the poison goes away, and she'll just rebuild. That we have a fighting chance to keep ourselves alive. Now, if you want to say this problem is too big, well, then you're just another brick in the wall. You can make a difference by changing yourself. Start with yourself. Because we don't need any more walls. We need bridges to be able to speak and talk and meet with one another. We don't need to build more walls. And we don't need people who are just a brick in the wall. We need to tear down the walls. It was one of the proudest moments of my life, being an American citizen, U.S. citizen, having a president go say, tear down that wall. And then it was one of the most disappointing moments of my adult life when we had one that says, build it. You know, this is not what we need. We do not need more walls. We need to tear them down and work together. And the 3 C's, collaboration, cooperation, and competition, we're out of balance. All we do is compete. We need to cooperate and collaborate more. Get back in balance, because that's what we're talking about. Just restore the balance that naturally existed before us. Thanks again, Sharif, for a wonderful
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. James Sid, for your very good comments. Mr. Donalds, what's your concluding remarks?
Well, I'm really glad that Dave brought up Everett Rogers, because I read Diffusions of Innovation and liked the book so much that every time a new edition came out, I would read it all the way until Everett Rogers passed away. And a project I'm working on right now, I'm thinking of soon contacting his protege, Tom Valente, who's used Rogers' work for health behavior. He's at the National Institute of Health now. He's a wonderful guy. He will actually answer email questions from almost anybody instantly. The guy is just a stellar human being. He's just as great a person as you could possibly ever meet. So one of the things that sort of came out of Rogers is he contributed to the thinking of social network analysis. And in social network analysis, we basically have this idea of core and periphery. And to understand that, you need to understand about the idea of network density. And so that's easy to explain, because if you think of your family, that's a very dense network, because everybody knows everybody and people know what's going on with each other. And if you change your behavior, everybody in your family is going to kind of be down on your case. So you kind of control each other and make it more difficult to change. And what winds up happening is networks kind of evolve. So there's a core of people where it's very dense. And as you move from the denser core, it becomes less and less dense. And it's been shown that innovation really does take place by people changing at the periphery and then moving in gradually towards the core, and as new core comes to be. My mentor, a guy named Harrison White, one of my mentors, says that networks are ties and networks. What binds us together are stories. And that goes back to what I'm saying, is that we have to start building a new, we have to start imagining a new future and creating a new future and creating a future. And I think that it seems to me that if we look at that core periphery model, places that haven't developed, that don't have people with single family houses, that don't have existing infrastructure, that don't have a complete dependency on petroleum, are better places to start looking than to start changing things, than looking right in the middle of places. For instance, the most conservative place in California is Bakersfield, California. And Bakersfield is where we get our oil. It's the oil part of California. And so people are very, very dependent on oil. So it would be hard for them to want to change and use less oil, because it would mean financial hardship for them. So right now, alternative energy and is not enough for us to be able to do what we need to do, and we need to keep building capacity, but we also need to figure out how to reduce our use. And I want to just tell people, if you move to a city, you're going to use less energy, because if you look at the energy footprint of somebody in Manhattan, it's far, far lower than the energy footprint of where I live in Santa Cruz, because people don't have to drive cars. You can take public transportation, and as they put double pane windows and everything and so on like that, there's ways that they can reduce the energy use. So there's technical ways that you can do it, but I think that what David's doing is incredibly valuable. The idea of starting at the edges and creating a new narrative, telling us a story, telling us actual things we can do, and helping us imagine a future where we know what to do in this situation. We know what to act. We have a vision of what the consequences of what we do are going to be, so we know what to do. And I think that's something we can all work on, and it's something that's not as obvious, because the technology is very obvious, but working together to create a narrative that will get us from here to there is the critical part of what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dave, what's your concluding remarks? Can you unmute, please?
I've spoken so much, and I think that it's really important to just, as a concluding statement, say that if people want to get involved in the Green Actioneers movement at the household and neighborhood level, just get in touch with me at greenactioneers.com. We're about to change our website to make it focus on our launch. The launch is Earth Day of 22, and we hope to have 100 schools involved, so that we will have 100 times 100 families involved, and that will be our launch. And then that'll be newsworthy, and then we'll be able to capitalize on that to get more eyeballs, more attention, and to move it forward. But that's what we've got to do, is we've got to look at this as a huge funnel, and we have to put into that funnel all the people who need to work on this project, and work them through that funnel so that they come out the other end changed. And that's a really difficult thing to do, but it's been done before with other topics, and it can be done, but you really have to focus on it. It can't be helter-skelter, and we can't approach this as an intellectual exercise. This is far beyond an intellectual exercise now. It's time for us to take action. The issue of how do we create more energy without creating more carbon does make us think about small nuclear reactors and using a fuel other than uranium. And I think that can happen. But just like my book is 22 years too late, that concept is probably 20 years too late, but we still got to do it. And we've got to do all these things as if we have enough time, even though we don't have enough time. And we can't let anybody say, well, it's too late for that. What we've got to say instead is, let's get to work and make it work. Okay, thanks a lot. I'm Dave Finnegan. See you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. This is really great discussion. And thank you, Mr. James Eid, Mr. Dave, and Professor Speed for joining today's session. Today's session is really great, and I believe that it will be really helpful for our audience. Thank you. Bye-bye, and take care.